When you think of the Northumberland coast, what springs to mind? Towering sand dunes, long grasses swaying in the sea breeze, vast, empty beaches stretching for miles and miles, the mournful cries of gulls circling overhead, ancient castles standing watch over the coastline, quaint, picturesque villages. Poltergeists? I imagine that thought never crossed your mind. To be honest, it hadn't crossed mine either, yet one of the most frightening poltergeist cases in Britain is said to have unfolded in one of Northumberland's most beautiful coastal villages. I'm talking about the Embleton Poltergeist. I'd never heard of the case until I began researching stories for these videos and my 365 Days of a Paranormal blog. If you'd like to explore more strange cases from across Britain, you'll find a link in the description below. But before we investigate the haunting itself, let's take a closer look at the village of Embleton. Not to be confused with the village of the same name in Cumbria, or the deserted medieval village in County Durham. Our Embleton lies on the Northumberland coast, between Beadnell to the north and Craster to the south. Its name is thought to derive from the Old English Embleton, often interpreted as the hill where caterpillars abound, a reference to the Whinstone Ridge that rises just to the south of the village. Embleton has a long and fascinating history. Its peel tower, still standing today, built in 1395, was constructed to protect the neighbouring church during the turbulent Anglo-Scottish border raids. The church itself dates back to the 12th century, with parts of the original Roman structure still visible today. Then in 1900, a golf course was laid out along the spectacular coastline towards Dunstanburgh Castle. Perhaps Embleton's most famous son was W.T. Stead, widely regarded as one of the pioneers of investigative journalism and editor of the Pall Mall Gazette. Today, Embleton is a peaceful destination, loved by walkers, birdwatchers, photographers and golfers, all drawn by the breathtaking sweep of Embleton Bay. But in the mid-1950s, beneath the calm surface of this idyllic village, something was happening that would make headlines and leave an ordinary family terrified in their own home. When I make these videos, they usually begin the same way. Something catches my attention, a post on social media, a mention in a book, or perhaps a magazine article. That's exactly how I first came across the story of the Embleton Poltergeist. Then the real work begins. I start digging through old maps, searching newspaper archives, and trying to separate the fact from the fiction. To me, that's one of the most important parts of making these documentaries. I want them to be historically accurate as possible. And that means looking beyond the stories that have simply been copied and pasted from one website to the next. The Embleton Poltergeist turned out to be a real puzzle. There is surprisingly little information about this case. Very few websites mention it. And after hours of searching, I managed to find just 4 contemporary newspaper articles describing the events. So let's begin with what we actually know. Patrick Phelan was 44 years old when the story reached the newspapers in 1957, placing his birth around about 1913. He was originally from Southern Ireland, which fits with his surname. Phelan is an Irish family name particularly associated with County Kilkenny and the surrounding counties. He served with the Royal Air Force for 13 years. both at home and overseas. His final posting was at RAF Boomer, just a few miles south of Embleton. Shortly after leaving the RAF in 1957, he was living with his wife and their 10 children in a house in Embleton that had been provided by the Royal Air Force. According to newspaper reports, the family had lived in Dunstanburgh House for around 2 years. The house was described as overlooking the sea and being 56 years old, which, if accurate, would place its construction around about 1901. That was all I had to work with. A house overlooking the sea, built around 1901, somewhere in Embleton village. Simple, or so I thought. The problem is that there is no Dunstanburgh House in Embleton today. I searched modern maps, compared historic Ordnance Survey maps, and I even visited the Northumberland archives in Ashington. Unfortunately, they could find no record of the house either. They did, however, help rule out one group of properties that I had suspected. The old maps did provide another clue. By comparing Ordnance Survey maps from 1899 with later editions, I looked for houses and properties that had appeared after the turn of the century. Eventually, two caught my attention. Today, they are luxury holiday cottages called the Lookout and Spindrift. They overlook the sea and can accommodate 12 people. They seem to fit the description perfectly. I thought I'd cracked it. Then I discovered they weren't built until 1922. Back to square one. But while filming around Embleton, I noticed something interesting. One of the gateposts at the property clearly bears the date 1901 carved into the stone. Was I onto something after all? For now though, let's leave my detective work to one side and return to the events which brought the Phelan family into the headlines. Before moving into Dunstanburgh House, the family had apparently been warned about strange noises and unexplained happenings. They were told not to worry, that it was probably just mice. Patrick Phelan, on the other hand, wasn't convinced. He reportedly remarked, "No mice ever carried on like this," and it soon became clear that the noises were only the beginning. At first, the family heard footsteps echoing through the house. Sometimes they sounded like those of a woman, at other times they were the heavier tread of a man. Then the disturbances escalated. Furniture in the downstairs rooms was overturned, and pillars were thrown down the staircase. The disturbances soon became far more than unexplained noises. According to the newspaper reports, the electricity was repeatedly switched off at the mains by persons unknown. The doorbell rang so persistently that the family eventually disconnected it. Even then, the ringing was replaced by a loud knocking at the front door. Light bulbs exploded without warning. Crockery and plates were smashed. Milk bottles were broken. On one occasion, Patrick Phelan claimed he was struck on the back of the head by a loaf of bread that had apparently been thrown across the room. He also told reporters that his wife had been punched in the eye by an unseen force. The family even discovered 2 notes warning them that they had to leave the house. While the children were playing in the back garden, they reportedly encountered a man dressed in Victorian clothing who ordered them to get out. One morning, the family came downstairs for breakfast, only to discover that one of the doors had been barricaded from the outside with a 7-foot wooden plank. The report soon attracted the attention of the Royal Air Force. Officers from nearby RAF Accrington visited Dunstanburgh House to inspect the damage for themselves. While they were there, a tremendous crash echoed from outside. Rushing into the garden, they discovered that a large ornamental stone urn had been smashed into pieces. Beside it lay a heavy oval stone slab. At the same time, 2 plastic cups, previously listed on the house inventory, had mysteriously vanished, only to be found upstairs on one of the beds. The Phelans also noticed a pattern. According to Patrick, activity almost ceased during the summer, with only a single incident involving a thrown cup. The disturbances seemed to return, however, with the onset of winter. Perhaps the strangest incident of all involved the grandfather clock. Although it was no longer working, the family claimed they had heard it strike 13 times. No one could offer a convincing explanation. According to a newspaper report, Patrick fell into rent arrears on the RAF-owned properties, and in the July of 1957, the family received an eviction notice, giving them 28 days to leave Dunstanburgh House. And that is where the documented story comes to an end. I believe the family remained in Northumberland. I've found records of a Patrick Phelan who appears to match the details in the newspaper reports, and who died in Northumberland in 1968, aged 56 years old. What I haven't found is any evidence that the haunting continued after the family left. But did I find the right property? Personally, I think I did. But without definitive records, I can't say that without complete certainty. What I can say is that, despite searching newspapers, archives, and historical records, I found no evidence that the alleged poltergeist activity continued after the Phelans moved out. So, what really happened at Dunstanburgh House? Was it an elaborate hoax? A series of unfortunate coincidences? Or was the Phelan family genuinely experiencing something they couldn't explain? After all the research, I still don't have the answer. But one thing is certain. For a brief period in the winter of 1957, one ordinary house in the quiet coastal village of Embleton became the centre of one of Northumberland's strangest and least known paranormal cases. I've been Richard Napper. You've been watching Favourite Haunts. Sleep tight.